What if I told you that one forgotten decision, on a single silent night, changed the course of history forever? That a seemingly minor shipwreck wasn't just a maritime tragedy, but the unseen catalyst for the entire new world. We all know the name Christopher Columbus, and we know his 3 ships. But the story of the one ship that didn't make it back his flagship, the Santa Maria, is a tale of triumph, betrayal, and a devastating loss that would echo for centuries. This is a story of a lost vessel, a vanished colony, and the dark, tangled legacy it left behind. To understand the end of the Santa Maria, you must first understand its beginning. The year is 1492. The place, the port of Palos de la Frontera in Spain. For years, one man, a Genoese mariner named Christopher Columbus, had been obsessed with a single radical idea, that by sailing west, he could reach the fabled riches of the East. His plan was met with years of ridicule, dismissed by learned men and mocked by royalty. But finally, in the court of Isabella I and Ferdinand II, the monarchs of a newly unified Spain, he found his benefactors. They were not just funding a voyage, they were investing in a dream, a desperate gamble to beat Portugal to the spice trade and assert their dominance on the world stage. And so, on August 3, 1492, he set sail with 3 ships. The nimble, fast caravel Nina, the slightly larger Pinta, and at the head of the fleet, Columbus's flagship, the largest of the 3, the Santa Maria. The Santa Maria was not a sleek, purpose-built vessel for exploration. She was a working merchant ship, and now a carrack built for cargo. With a deeper draft and a broader hull than her smaller, faster companions, her true name was the La Galaga, but she was nicknamed the Santa Maria, after the Blessed Virgin Mary. She was a symbol of the expedition's ambition and its financial backing, a floating testament to the immense faith and immense risk that Spain was taking. Her length was roughly 58 feet on the keel, her beam about 25 feet, and her capacity around 100 tons. On board, a crew of approximately 40 men, a motley group of sailors, adventurers, and a few men who, just months before, had been sentenced to jail and were pardoned on the condition that they joined the voyage. Think of the Santa Maria as the nerve center. It was here that Columbus, the admiral, commanded the fleet. It was here that the crucial charts were kept, the logs meticulously updated, and the grand vision of reaching Asia was discussed and debated among the officers. The fate of the entire expedition rested on this one, rather unglamorous vessel. For 10 long weeks, they sailed into the unknown. Days bled into weeks, and the crew, who had never been so far from sight of land, grew increasingly restless. Every day the sun rose and set over the same empty expanse of blue. There was no wind, then too much wind. They saw strange birds, then none at all. The fear of sailing off the edge of the world was a very real thing. On board the Santa Maria, Columbus had to constantly manage the morale of his men, fending off whispers of mutiny with promises of riches and the certainty of his convictions. But on October 12, 1492, a lookout on the Pinta cried, "Tierra!" Land, the nightmare was over. They had arrived. Not in the bustling markets of Japan, but on a small island in the Bahamas, which Columbus would name San Salvador. They were greeted by the Taino people, a group he would later describe as gentle, generous, and with a simplicity that astonished the Europeans. It was a moment of unparalleled triumph, a victory against impossible odds. The ships explored the region for the next 2 months, charting the coasts of Cuba and Hispaniola, now known as Haiti and the Dominican Republic. This period was a paradise for Columbus and his crew. They were in awe of the lush landscapes, the exotic flora and fauna, and the rumors constant, tantalizing rumors of gold. They were in a race against time, but not against the elements. The true race was against their own. You see, the fleet had already been fractured. Manso, the captain of the Pinta, and a man whose investment had been crucial to the voyage, had grown impatient, convinced he could find a legendary golden island known as Bake. He split off from the main fleet on November 21st, leaving Columbus with only the Nina and his flagship, the Santa Maria. This act of insubordination was a blow to Columbus's authority, but also a chilling omen of what was to come. It was a clear sign that the promise of gold was a more powerful motivator than loyalty or command. As Columbus continued to explore the northern coast of Hispaniola, he was now navigating not just the sea, but the complex, treacherous shoals of human greed. And then came Christmas Eve, 1492. The Santa Maria was sailing through calm, quiet waters near what is now Cap-Haïtien, Haiti. The sea was as flat as glass, the wind barely a whisper. After weeks of tense sailing, the crew was exhausted. For once, the conditions seemed perfectly safe. It was the kind of night where you let your guard down, night where a captain might feel it safe to doze off after a long watch. Columbus, it is said, retired to his cabin. He left the ship in the charge of the ship's master, Juan de la Cosa, a seasoned sailor and the owner of the vessel himself. But de la Cosa too was tired. He left the helm in the hands of a young cabin boy, a decision that was a grave, flagrant violation of maritime law. The boy, inexperienced and likely lulled by the calm, did not notice the subtle dark shapes rising from the shallow depths. At midnight, a sudden horrifying sound ripped through the quiet night. A grinding, scraping, violent shudder. The Santa Maria had run aground on a hidden coral reef. The chaos was immediate. The ship was trapped. Columbus rushed on deck, furious and in a state of panic. He ordered de la Cosa to lower the small boat and drop an anchor astern to try and catch the ship free. But de la Cosa and his men, in an act of staggering cowardice and self-preservation, rowed off to the Nina, which was a half-mile away, leaving their admiral and his crew to face the rising tide alone. The Nina's captain, Vicente Aizi, was appalled. He came to the rescue in his own boat and with his crew worked to bring the stranded men to safety. But the Santa Maria was doomed. The tide was ebbing, pushing her further and further onto the reef. Her seams began to open, and her hold filled with water. The ship was unsalvageable. The flagship of the Spanish fleet, the symbol of Columbus's triumph, had been lost without a single storm, a single battle, or a single moment of valor. It was lost to a moment of negligence, an act of betrayal, in a hidden patch of rock. This seemingly random event, a minor shipwreck in the vast ocean, set into motion a chain of consequences that would shape the history of a hemisphere. First, it forced a decision. With only 2 ships remaining, and the largest of them a broken wreck, there was no way all the men could return to Spain. Columbus needed to act quickly. He knew the timber from the ship was strong and plentiful. With the help of a local Taino chief, who was immensely generous and empathetic, Columbus salvaged what he could from the wreckage: masts, rigging, and lumber. Using these materials, he made a decision that he had likely never considered before this disaster. He would build a fort. And so, the first European settlement in the Americas, a crude but functional fortress, was born. He named it La Navidad, in honor of the day of the shipwreck. Did you know that the Taino people helped the Europeans in this effort? They were so compassionate and helpful that Columbus was moved to write about their generosity in his log. The peaceful, cooperative nature of the first encounter is a stark contrast to the violence and enslavement that would later follow. Columbus chose 39 men, including the master, de la Cosa, to remain at La Navidad. Their mission was to trade for gold, establish friendly relations with the natives, and secure a foothold for the return of the Spanish fleet. Columbus promised them he would return within a year, and with that promise, he set sail on the small Nina to return to Spain, leaving his grand legacy and his crew behind. For Columbus, the return was a mix of triumph and anxiety. He had a triumphant tale to tell the monarchs, a story of new lands, new people, and the first discovery of gold. But he also had a crew to account for, a flagship that lay at the bottom of the sea, and a nascent colony of men he had left to fend for themselves. In March of 1493, he arrived back in Spain, where he was greeted as a hero. He was hailed as the man who had discovered a new route to the Indies. The courts of Europe buzzed with the news. A second voyage was immediately planned, but this time it was a massive affair. Not 3 ships, but 17, carrying 1,200 men, priests, soldiers, farmers, and artisans, all ready to colonize the New World. On his second voyage, Columbus sailed with the confidence of a man who knew what awaited him. But as he approached Hispaniola in late 1493, a feeling of unease began to set in. The familiar landmarks were there, but the air was silent. They found nothing but ash and bone. La Navidad was gone, burned to the ground. The men were dead, killed by the very people who had so graciously helped them. Peaceful, hopeful beginning had ended in slaughter. What had happened in the year that Columbus was gone? It's a question that has haunted historians for centuries. And while we don't have definitive proof, the circumstantial evidence is damning. The men left behind were not disciplined soldiers, were adventurers, freed prisoners, and gold-hungry fortune-seekers. They quickly turned on each other and began to abuse the Taino people, taking their women and stealing their gold. A power struggle for command broke out between the men and the local tribes, led by other chiefs, grew weary of their cruelty. Eventually, the different Taino groups united and retaliated, attacking the fort and killing every man. Think about the domino effect. Santa Maria runs aground, a result of laziness and a single bad decision. The shipwreck forces Columbus to build a fort and leave men behind. These men, left to their own devices, betray the trust of the very people who saved them. And the result? The first colony is destroyed, and the second voyage, meant to be a grand gesture of peaceful settlement, is now forced to become an act of conquest and revenge. The loss of the Santa Maria meant that there was no safe vessel for the men to return in. It meant that a crude fort had to be built from its remains. It meant that 39 men were left behind, a skeleton crew who were not ready for the reality of their situation. And it meant that the first encounter between two worlds, which began with such mutual respect, was poisoned by the greed and violence of a few. The story of the Santa Maria is not just about a shipwreck. It's about the start of a new, complex narrative. It's a story of how a vessel, meant to carry a triumphant crew back home, became a tomb for a forgotten dream. Did you know that the exact location of the shipwreck has never been definitively confirmed? For centuries, archaeologists and treasure hunters have been searching for the wreck. In 2014, a well-known explorer named Barry Clifford made a highly publicized claim that he had found the Santa Maria. He based his claim on a set of findings he had made years earlier, an old cannon and a pile of ballast stones. But his claim was quickly debunked by UNESCO experts who pointed out that the artifacts dated to a much later period. The mystery of the Santa Maria continues to this day. The search for the ship's remains is more than a hunt for treasure. It's a search for a historical artifact of immense symbolic power. Finding the wreck would not only be a scientific triumph, but it would also be a physical link to the very moment when two worlds collided. It would be a tangible piece of the beginning of the end of the indigenous population of the Caribbean, the start of the transatlantic slave trade, and the violent birth of colonialism. The Santa Maria and the men left behind at La Navidad are not just footnotes in history. They are the unseen foundation upon which the entire history of the New World was built. A history of triumph, yes, but also a history of immense suffering, all set in motion by a single shipwreck on a silent Christmas night. The loss of the Santa Maria didn't just end a journey. It started a new one, a journey into a complicated, often violent, and irreversible future. It was a disaster that was transformed into an opportunity, and that opportunity, in turn, unleashed forces that no one could have predicted. So now I leave you with a question. If history could turn so dramatically because of a single fateful decision and a lost ship, what? Seemingly small events and forgotten decisions are being made today, right now, that could shape the future in ways we can't even begin to imagine.